Well, welcome to another session of What's the Point? It's all about economic development in Wyoming, and we call it What's the Point because earlier we have talked about a triangle as a framework for how do we really make sure that all of the communities in the state can take part in economic development, and where do we all fit into that? And today we're really lucky because we're going to talk with Kayla and Trey about Main Street. And I think that we all can recognize in our towns and our communities that Main Street, you can tell when they're vibrant, you can tell when things are happening, and really they are the heart of the city. And so I think there's been a really big revival in a lot of main streets in Wyoming for sure, but definitely across the country as a really good economic development indicator, and also just as fun in our community. So I'm really excited now to talk with both Trey Sherwood and Kayla Kler about our Main Street programs and the one in Laramie in particular. So rather than do introductions, because I don't know if either of you really need them, I'm going to just jump into questions if that's okay. So Trey, so you wear a lot of hats, but we're going to talk mostly about Laramie Main Street right now. So Trey, you and Laramie won the GAMSA, which is the Great American Main Street Award for this year. Tell us a little bit about that and what the process was to get there.
Oh, goodness. So as most of your listeners know, economic development is a long game. So it's not something that happens overnight. So Laramie Main Street started as a nonprofit in 2005. We had a little bit of a rough go in terms of 5 directors in 5 years. But when I came on, I had the luxury of having a board that was very forward thinking. And so we commissioned a long-range strategic plan for our downtown, adopted that in 2012, and having the support of the city and the community to continue to work on that. The Great American Main Street Award is really that look back of, where did you start, where are you going, and what are the steps that you're taking to get there? And so it's amazing to be recognized at the national level for both our planning process, but then our grassroots boots on the ground, like everybody's sort of just chipping away at that plan and understanding what that means on a daily basis, a weekly basis, or an annual basis to get to that bigger picture, which is a vibrant community, a vibrant downtown where our businesses are thriving.
Nice. I want to dive in on that planning piece a little bit because we definitely know that planning is important. We also know that no plan survives reality. So I want to talk a little bit about that, and mostly not from all of the steps that you did that worked out well, but talk a little bit about how you kept the community engaged and your board engaged, even though a lot of times at the beginning of a plan, it's a lot of work without a lot of results.
Right. Oh, yes, absolutely. And so when we were going through that planning process, and when I started, there was 3 different boards that I reported to. So I had a Downtown Development Authority, I had a Downtown DLBA, a Merchants Association, Main Street, and then our relationship with the city. And so as the sole person running around all these meetings, it was exhausting. And it really took understanding what was motivating everybody. So we all had the shared passion for downtown and understanding which roles people wanted to play and getting that plan as something to rally around. But definitely it's bumpy. Main Street is an entrepreneurial venture. So you hit a wall and you have to pivot. You have to be willing to say that didn't work, either because you've evaluated it or, it clearly failed. And be willing to sort of regroup within those ecosystems and keep going. So one of the things, the biggest barrier we overcame was finally getting all those entities under one umbrella, the Laramie Main Street umbrella. And that really has helped us continue momentum.
And putting all of those groups together, again, I think that alignment piece is something we're definitely working on in the state as a whole. That's not always an easy process, but the things tend to move faster after that alignment happens.
Yes. Having that common vision, right? Everybody's rowing in the same direction. They share, the where are we going and why are we going this way? So that common why, which often comes out in storytelling, right? So talking to your neighbor, to the business owner, to the resident downtown about why do you live here and why are you passionate about your community and what do you want to see happen to downtown? Bringing all that together and, again, that common vision regardless of ideology, political background, socioeconomic status, but sharing that vision is so critical for progress.
Right. So Kayla, Now you are I would say relatively new to the title, but I think you've been doing the Main Street work for quite a while, and you've been really involved in Main Street. And I think our communities around the state definitely know that you're somebody who works really, really hard for Main Street. And so as Main Street manager at the Business Council, Laramie's not the only one to win this award. Who are some of the others that have won it, and what did they find?
Yeah, so our first SCAMSA winner was Rollins in 2015. And then we had kind of just a slew, like one after another, it feels like. We had Rock Springs in 2018. Evanston was recognized as a GAMSA semifinalist twice, 2019 and 2020, if I remember correctly, and then, of course, Laramie in 2022. So it's really cool to be able to see all of the different communities just one after another get this recognition. And I mean, we do have a fairly small network, I would say, of Main Street communities in comparison to some of the other states that practice it. So I feel like our ratio of GAMSA winners is incredible,
Yes.
right? And I think every one of our communities that has won the GAMSA award been recognized by it in some way has done it for a different reason, which is really inspiring. It's not like a cookie cutter process. Everybody is implementing change differently. Obviously, every one of those communities is very different. All the way across the board, and so it's really cool to be able to see GAMSA recognized in all of those different backgrounds.
Right. So you mentioned that we don't have a high number of Main Street programs within the state, but how many do we have now, and are there some new folks in the mix?
There are. So we have 14 communities now. The Wyoming Main Street program has a tiered system in the way that we recognize our programs. So we have an aspiring program, and that's where communities start out in the onboarding process to get them to the level of where Laramie or Rock Springs or Rollins can be. And then we also have an affiliate level, which is those programs that maybe are a little bit smaller population-wise, but mostly are volunteer-based. Sometimes they're housed in another organization, but they're still practicing Main Street in some capacity. We want to make sure that we extend our resources to them, support them in any way possible. And then we do have the certified level, which is our highest recognition for Main Street programs, and that's where those Rollins, Laramie, Rock Springs type programs live. And we have 9 of those actually, so it's all the way across the state from Sheridan to Evanston to Cheyenne and everywhere.
Great. And I do want to say, when it comes to sort of a program that lays out how they should work, how each of these communities do, and empowers them to do the work themselves, I think Main Street does a really good job of that. It's something that we at the Business Council really want to model, because as a whole, we want to empower the communities to do that. What are some of the things that you think Main Street does really well in the program itself?
I think it comes back to the grassroots, like Trey was talking about. It's really about community involvement first. I feel like there's a lot of programs and a lot of maybe initiatives out there that are sometimes a little more top-down than what's effective. And so to get residents involved and to get business owners just generally wanting to make a change in downtown, I think is the most inspiring, because it also puts some emotion and some personal connection behind it. And I think that's how it becomes sustainable too. It's because even if you have people leaving or coming in, there's always that general vision, like Trey said, that makes people want to move forward and do that.
Right, I'll jump in and say too, I love how holistic it is. So this idea that Main Street communities are using the built environment as part of an economic development strategy. So place-based revitalization. So everything from how the buildings look and how well they're preserved, to public art, to events, to support for your local business, and then engagement of the community. So I see it as unique in that it is broad enough to adapt to any size community, from Cookville to Glen Rock, large enough to be accommodating to Cheyenne as an urban center, but it's not so narrowly focused that we miss pieces of economic development. So I mean, obviously I'm a big fan of the Main Street movement, and just so excited to be able to talk to you and your viewers about what's working.
Good. Well, speaking of what's working, one of the things that I've heard about and I've seen in some various locations around the state, but also in other places, is that Main Street is not just retail, that there are other things going on to make Main Street really vital and vibrant. And so talk to me a little bit about living on Main Street or manufacturing on Main Street, and some of these things that you see kind of coming into Main Streets and how those can change the look of it.
Yeah, absolutely.
And either one of you jump right in. So
Yeah,
please.
well, I'll let Trey talk about the Laramie side of things, and then maybe talk a little bit about some of what our other communities are doing too.
Yeah.
In that realm.
So, I mean, something we were able to highlight in our GAMSA nomination video was our small scale manufacturing. So our boutique makers, and thinking about building out this pipeline to bring back manufacturing on Maine. And that starts with things like the farmers market, right? And plugging in with your artisans and your craftsmen and your local ag producers, and giving them a platform to sort of test their product within the consumer environment, and then helping them go to then production or a storefront or sell at Big Hollow, our grocery store. And so we've switched gears and thinking about the farmers market as just an event, but as an entrepreneurial pipeline. And now we see that Range Leather and Atmosphere Mountain Works and Bond's Brewing that are canning, and Sugar Mouse, which is baking bread for all the other restaurants downtown, are thriving on Maine. And they have a retail component, but they're making what you're buying, behind the scenes in that historic building. And it is just so thrilling to watch them grow. And what they bring to the downtown is really a sense of collaboration. Because with issues with supply chain, they're having to be very mindful about reaching out to their neighbors, within this ecosystem, to close those loops and to really think about using our local resources to get to that end product.
Nice. So, well, that's super exciting, and it's good to have that communication and to have people feel like they're not alone, and to understand what their neighbors can do to provide that.
Yes.
And I think that's a key component, especially in a time when, like you said, supply chains are strained and things are maybe not as certain as they used to be. It's a lot more certain to go next door, right, for that cup of sugar or whatever it is, than it is to have to rely on something from thousands of miles away.
And then the ability to custom, right? So I can walk into Atmosphere and say, will you make me a dog bed, right? And so I've got a strange shaped camper and I can measure the floor, take them that measurements, and I have a custom dog bed that I've spent my money locally on. It was actually less expensive than if I had ordered on Amazon, and I got exactly what I wanted. So a huge fan of supporting those local manufacturers because they treat their customers well.
That's right.
And I think manufacturing is, beyond just Laramie, I think of Sheridan and Gillette as great examples too of similar business models and similar, range of businesses in their downtown district. And it's not just retail, right? I mean, it's hospitality, it's restaurants, it's, things to do as well. It's that well-rounded approach. I think the other thing too that a lot of our Main Street communities are thinking about, just beyond like encouraging more manufacturing and entrepreneurship and pop-up spaces for maybe starting out business owners as well, is housing, downtown housing. And obviously Laramie is a great case study of that, but I think there's other communities that are thinking about that as well, just because of how much vacant second story, third story space that we have in our downtown buildings that it's just sitting empty, right? Like there's no use happening with them right now, and maybe at one point they were housing. That was their original intent. If we can just restore them back to that, and maybe partially even solve some of this housing crisis as well. So it's killing two birds with one stone, for lack of a better metaphor.
It chips away for sure, and it brings life and vibrancy to the Main Street. As I was walking downtown this morning, it was really great because you could see everybody sitting out on the sidewalks drinking coffee or having that, and I don't recall that was as popular before COVID. And so one of the things that by expanding the restaurant and having some space, we've really kind of increased that, and now people are using it more and more. So I think that's been a really good change for restaurants and for meeting spaces. And as you mentioned, it's sort of like a place where people can meet up and not have to be going for some specific reason, but to go and live.
I think of downtown as like that third space principle. Because you have like your first and second spaces between like work and home, but then downtown can serve as like a third space for people to just be, right? It's a place they feel comfortable and accepted, but there's also things to do. There's a variety of options. Like you said, they can sit outside or they can just enjoy some of the public amenities there are. But beyond that too, you're supporting business by encouraging people
to be downtown. So I want to kind of go in a couple different directions. I think you led me into this whole idea of how do we lead people downtown, and events that are going on downtown are definitely one thing. And I know in a lot of the communities in Wyoming, we can center ideas around the downtown, right? So there are events that happen, farmers markets, Jubilee Days is going on right now, Brew Fest is about to happen. There are a lot of events that go on. So talk to me a little bit about those. But then I also want to think about those events that are maybe not centered around downtown, but and Main Street, but really can impact Main Street. And those are things like youth sporting events, and hosting tournaments, or hosting other events in your community, and how that impacts downtown.
Man, and Gillette has done such an incredible job with that.
That's what I was going to say. Even Gillette has become kind of a, I guess, like a sport tourism capital, I suppose you could say. And it really has impacted their downtown because they have such an influx of people just coming into the community generally. And then really what their job is Gillette Main Street, is to get those people downtown, whether that's, businesses that can service them or just general word of mouth, having a great place to be. And I think that there's other events that happen throughout the state too that maybe aren't necessarily like sports tourism, but they're obviously very impactful. You think of Cheyenne Frontier Days, right? I mean, everybody is downtown at Cheyenne Frontier Days. But then Gillette with the sports complex, and then even like Sheridan has some of their events that they host is like the Downtown Sheridan Association, but beyond that, they're on a corridor between Devil's Tower and Yellowstone, so it's capturing people coming through that way. I think that there's a lot of factors and a lot of events going on that influence, but it comes back to promotion and marketing. So,
and then the Main Street approach to using promotion and marketing as economic development tools is that thoughtfulness, is that storytelling, and that why. So we launched a new event. We started in 2019. We all know what happened. Everything paused. But this spring, we were able to do the International Flavor Festival. So it was a really purposeful way for downtown Laramie to connect with our international community on campus. And so we were able to put out a call to international residents and students for recipes. And we were able to then match different ethnicities and nationalities with local restaurants who then made those dishes during International Flavor Festival. So instead of doing a traditional restaurant week, we said, well, what feels more authentic to the Laramie community, and what audience have we not done a good job of reaching out to? So I challenge people to think about, again, events and promotion, not just as what your tourism board is doing, but really a strategic tool to utilize, again, towards economic vitality.
So both of you were in Virginia, right? That's something that we host. I want you to talk a little bit about that trip, because I think it's really exciting, and it's a great model for how to do other sort of missions, if you will. And then I also want to know, what are the things that you saw out there that you're going to bring back and make it happen. So if you could talk a little bit about our trip to Virginia and what that's like.
Yeah, so it was a twofold reason. The National Main Street Center hosts a National Main Street Conference every year, and it rotates, so it's a different city every year, and it's 2 or 3 days. So Richmond, Virginia was selected as the host city for the conference this year, and in conjunction, we host a best practices workshop, which is really what you want to know.
And Wyoming is the only state to do this?
Yes. So it's a 2-day workshop where we bring out all sorts of Wyoming folks, not only Main Streeters and staff, but their local boards, city officials, elected folks as well. We get them all together in Virginia, in this case, and put them on a bus, and we pick 3 or 4 cities or towns to visit that are geographically located around wherever that host city is. So because it was in Richmond this year, we picked out 3 communities to visit between that Friday and Saturday before the conference, and so it ended up being Farmville, Blackstone, and Hopewell as our 3 communities. And so part of the selection process for those communities is looking at population size, but also looking at how their Main Street programs are run is a big part of it. The general intention of the Best Practices Workshop is really just to get our folks out to a place they may not see otherwise, make a connection with another Main Street manager, and learn not only about what went well or what has been going well with their Main Street program, but also what hasn't, to learn some of those valuable lessons without having to do it yourself, right? We do it every year. I think, gosh, how long have we done it now, Trey?
This was my 11th or 12th.
Yeah.
But
so it's
longer than that.
Yeah, it's a long-standing tradition for sure. And because of COVID, we didn't get the opportunity to do it the last 2 years. Obviously, the National Main Street Conference was the first time in 3 years that we were able to all be together. And like I said, it was a wide range of folks. We've done a tour one of those larger charter buses fall and get out there and learn from the communities. And so, yeah, again, Wyoming is the only state that does it.
I want to jump on that real quick before you talk about some of the things maybe that you saw out there. Where I see this fitting into the triangle, it's really important because it's about educating as many people as we can, not just the people who are doing it day to day, but the people who influence it or are leaders in their community, board members, making sure that we all kind of see how economic development happens in other places and really kind of saying, hey, these are best practices or best lessons that we can learn, and how do we bring that back to our communities, and how do we understand how it happens, because a number of our board members, a number of the people in our communities, they're not necessarily focused on the Main Street program or the best, or economic development all the time. So some of these concepts can be a little challenging, but to see them in other areas, I think raising that education of the folks who are doing this work and who are influencing the work is really critical. And that's something that we're going to tackle in another way this year within economic development in the state, and kind of really model it after, again, the best practices trip that Main Street does.
So Laramie was really fortunate this year because of our Great American Main Street Award to be able to send our entire board. That's never happened before. So 2 staff people, their first time, my board's first time. And so everybody came home with a little nugget. And we had a debriefing, and actually what you see on the wall is our notes from like what everybody is passionate about doing and where that fits in with the strategic plan. And so it can be small things like making your downtown more pet friendly. We know that Laramie, being an outdoor rec community, we have a lot of pets, and so how do we accommodate that lifestyle both downtown and on the trails? To how do we do a better job of partnering with private business owners on facade improvements? And so what are those carrots and incentives that we can do a better job of funding to walk alongside our property owners, our business owners, to make physical improvements to the district? So I think the takeaways were grand. I think what I came back even more passionate about was housing. There's a lot of conversations about the role that Main Street plays in housing development. We learned that maybe 10% of Main Street communities play the role of developer, which is surprising to us because that's what we are doing. We are building out apartment units. So to be able to connect with like Emporia, Kansas, and other communities that have leaned into this work, and there's so much, they're ahead of us. So to be able to see that pathway, and what did they do for zoning? What did they do for incentives? How did they engage the community? How did they train their small scale developers to work in historic buildings, right? And so it was just really inspiring to see that, one, we're not alone in this work, and that there are others who are setting groundwork for best practices that we can borrow and learn from.
Yeah, that's great. That's great. Do we know where next year's conference is at all yet?
We do. It's in Boston, Massachusetts next year.
Oh boy!
And in March.
It'll be late March. I do not know the dates off the top of my head, but yeah, late March in Boston. It'll be really fun. So we are working on details for the 2023 best practices now.
Great.
Scoping out some locations.
And that's a good opportunity for people to start planning and start thinking about it, because it's a commitment, but it's really worth it, I think, from an educational standpoint, and it probably helps the team that's in that charter bus become a real team.
Yes.
Team Wyoming across.
Absolutely. I think that's one of the most special things about the Main Street Network is we all have each other's backs. So regardless of the size of the community, the age of the program, Kayla does such a wonderful job of getting us together monthly so that we can, talk about an issue or attend a training or just be in community with one another and offer each other support, because a lot of times Main Street programs are all volunteer or it's a part-time person, right? And it can feel really lonely to be, doing this like solo in your community, but to be able to reach out and say, I'm struggling with this. What did you do? And learn from each other. It's really powerful. So I think that's what also makes Wyoming very special, is that we're in constant communication with each other.
That's good.
Oh, the plug.
Yes.
Oh yeah. So another training. Okay. So I'm so excited to be working with Kayla and National Main Street on a community transformation workshop. So National is coming to Laramie and Cheyenne September 14th, 15th, 16th to do a little piece of that national conference here in Wyoming.
Fantastic.
So we're very excited to be chosen as a host community. to show off again our small scale manufacturing and our housing development, and then to partner with Cheyenne, to talk about Main Street best practices. So
Well, that's super exciting.
Yeah.
That is good. Yeah, good plug. I'm glad we did that. I was about to ask for a plug for how does a community become a Main Street community in Wyoming?
It's a complex question because
Okay.
it really depends. It just depends on where the community's at, right? Because every community needs something a little bit different, which is nice in the way of approaching Main Street because it is so flexible and you can really, you can implement Main Street in a way that makes sense for your downtown and for your community, but it's going to look a little bit different depending on how big you are as a population or what kind of programs or organizations are already at work in your community and figuring out a way to maybe work together as a larger group. I would say that if anybody's interested in joining Main Street or getting started in the Main Street program, to just reach out to me first and let's just have a conversation about what the community is like and what you're really seeking as a Main Street program, because I think that's an important part of it is maybe to have an introductory vision of what you see Main Street working as a tool, right? Because ultimately it is. It's methodology and it's a tool to make change happen in your downtown. And to have a clear, or at least starting the way towards a clear understanding of what you would like your community to be as a good start.
Nice. Well, and I like that approach because it's not a one-size-fits-all.
Yeah.
It's trying to understand what the challenges are, what they're trying to get out of it, what the problem is that they're trying to solve, and then apply the right tools to it. So I think that's a really good thing. And to me, it's the best way to solve those kinds of problems because they are complex and it's not the same for everybody. So that's good to hear that that's sort of the methodology behind it as well.
Well, and you have to identify the problems before you can solve them, right?
I totally agree with that. Yeah, it makes a lot of sense to me. So now switching gears a little bit, maybe broadening the topics a little bit because Trey, you wear multiple hats within the state. So obviously at Laramie as the Main Street manager and those kinds of things are really important to the community. But then to the state, you're also a state representative. So talk to us a little bit about your role within economic development at the state level, and then maybe go a little bit into what you're seeing and what you kind of a little bit about the change you're seeing happening in building resilient communities, because that's something that's really important to you. It's sort of your slogan. So let's talk a little bit about that if you can.
yes, thank you. So I'm a representative for House District 14 here in Albany County, and decided to run during the pandemic because I was bored and wanted something to do. No, I went through Leadership Wyoming in 2009, and ever since then I really have had a passion for Wyoming as a state, not just Laramie, the community in Laramie. But the pandemic gave me that window, that opportunity to run. And I really ran on the platform of economic development and support for small locally owned businesses, and just wasn't seeing some of those nuanced conversations happening at the state level. Was fortunate enough to be able to be appointed to the Joint Minerals Business and Economic Development Committee, which I love. I've learned so much about our oil and gas industry, our energy economy, and then sitting there trying to bring that perspective. What have I learned from Main Street? What have I learned from boots on the ground community development to these approaches? And so to be able to see the Wyoming Energy I forgot the name of the agency. Authority. Thank you. Wyoming Energy Authority, come with this holistic strategy about value added and using Wyoming resources, whether that's from rare earth minerals or not burning coal to make a brick to build things with, to nuclear, to all the hydrogen, all the things. It's just been fascinating. And so I hope that I am serving our community by bringing the Laramie perspective to the table, and at the same time just getting a broader view of what makes Wyoming tick, within our energy economy. How can we honor that, and at the same time move forward and transition to be more resilient. So because we have a very low tax base, we rely heavily on our oil and gas industry. We've historically always gone through boom and bust cycles. So to me, thinking about resiliency is lessening the extremes of those boom and bust cycles. So being true to our heritage industries, including ag, tourism, not only leading into outdoor rec, and our creative economy, how do we structure economic development in a way that buffers us from those extremes? Right? And how do we help give communities the tools they need to find stability, and so they're not having to say, we're in a bus cycle, we're letting people off, we're in a boom cycle, we can't find people, and just this constant jarring that we see happening in our state. And not to say there's a quick fix, but being mindful of that, and what industries we recruit or support, what existing businesses we help expand, how we define good jobs, good paying jobs. I'm rambling because it's big.
It's big and it's complex, but a lot of the things that you touched on, we're definitely going to be facing, and I think we're going to be facing even more because of some of the exciting changes, but also some of the expansion in some of the areas. We sometimes we don't mention Trona enough, right?
Yeah.
There's just a really huge natural deposit that we get to that brings a lot of foreign investment, and it brings a lot of opportunity for expansion. And I think that's an area, along with our energy sector, and that is going to grow over the next few years. And so maybe this is a question for both of you as well: is there's an intersection of community development and economic development that whether they go in sequence or whether they go together or whether one happens and another one doesn't. It's a really complex animal, if you will. Community development and economic development, because to do it right, they need to go together.
Yes.
And to do it right, we need to be prepared. And I do see a lot of areas of our state that in the next few years are going to experience some growth and some change, and we want to make sure our communities are ready. So
Like
talk to me a little bit.
Kemmer is going to explode, right?
Yeah.
They used to be a Main Street community. I don't know what those conversations are, but I visualize those building blocks. I mean, fits in with the triangle as well. That you have to have local leadership and quality of life amenities and infrastructure to then support those other things. And so as we look to communities in transition, whether that's away from oil and gas or really leveraging those local economies that we haven't invested in prior, from the Main Street model, that community engagement piece is critical, is a foundational part of then having a strong local economy.
So much of the workforce enjoying our downtown amenities are from all of those industries. Right. So to have that involvement in that community engagement, that feedback from all sectors, all perspectives, all walks of life is critical, right? And I think going back to what Trey said, especially quality of life, coming from the state level, I feel like so much of the work that we do from the state program, the state level generally, ties in so nicely with some of the other things that the business council is working on. I mean, you can't necessarily recruit business without a great downtown, without great quality of life in a community. I think that's one of those foundational things that people are looking for when they relocate. So I think it's really important that we're working together to be at the table for those conversations and to continue our work downtown, but also think about what are the other outside factors that we're influencing by doing work in the downtown.
Right, and I think the word is "and." Right, so many of these things are "and," I think when you're resource constrained or when there's scarcity, we think of either or. Right, and what we're seeing, I think, not just on the big picture of economic development of the existing energy and existing infrastructure that's here, we need to think about it as an "and," not an "or." And I think the same thing goes for economic development, for business recruitment or business expansion, as well as community development. We need to think about those as "ands" and help educate folks that there's a right time for them, there's a right situation for them, and they can work really well together if thought through and it's applied. And I think that's the cool thing is that we get to be the "and." We get to look at both of those and have both of those tools in our toolbox.
Like be in that gray space, but then invite others to join us in there. So as an elected official, it's my job to help educate my colleagues and share my experiences with Main Street. And so it's exciting to see the legislature leaning into the nuances of a holistic economic development. So there's conversations about pathways and trails, right? That is walkability and livability, and then supporting outdoor rec. And at the same time, finally starting to have more complex conversations about housing, which right now, I believe lack of housing, options for housing is the number one impediment to economic development in Wyoming, right? So every one of our communities is struggling for workforce, senior, again, nuanced depending on the community, but so to see the legislature lean into not just business recruitment,
right,
but again, that broader picture of what do we need to do to create an entrepreneurial ecosystem in our state is really exciting.
Yep.
And so I'm honored and humbled to be part of that, and happy to bring, again, this Main Street philosophy, lens to the table at the state level.
Well, and I think that's an important component to all of these discussions is that, sometimes people will think, oh, if you just do this, and they fill in the blank with one item.
Yeah.
And I think what we all know and what we learn every day in these conversations is the nuance and the fact that there is not one solution that's going to take care of everything, but it's going to be a combination. And so bringing multiple views to the table to make sure that those are not just represented, but people can understand the choices and the consequences that we make as we make decisions on how they impact that whole picture, because it's not just if you just do this, everything will be fixed. And I think that's the other key is that we're going to have to play a little chess, right? We're going to have to say, that idea looks really good, but here are the 3 other things that we need to do to make that happen. And I think that's a key element that I actually do see a lot in the state, is that people are not coming to the table with silver bullets. They're not coming to the table with if we just do this like another state, then it'll be fixed. It's let's have a conversation about how we can bring everybody's view in and come up with a solution that starts to begin to solve the problems. It doesn't automatically fix it. So I definitely see that happening today. So I guess as you think about the transition from maybe a Main Street that, within, and again, for both of you, take a look at some of the Main Street communities in the state, and then take a look at your own and say, what was that path like, and how did it start, and what were some of those critical decisions? Because I'd like to kind of end with a little bit of that, like you mentioned, it's a long road. Economic development's a long road, and some of those critical things that happen in the pieces of the puzzle that got put together to get to the spot.
Like little nuggets of success along
Yeah.
the way, because it's never done. It makes me laugh when people say, "Oh, we did Main Street, we're done." It's like, no, it's not just hanging up banners, and putting out flower plots.
Although that's pretty good.
It's part of the strategy, right? But then you've got to keep going.
Right.
And so again, when I reflect back on Laramie, it was again having that, the community rally around having a strategic plan and having the support of the city, and having a common vision to work towards, I think is one of our secrets in the sauce, or however you might say that. But then some of my board members really attribute our success to storytelling. So listening to the stories of community members, diverse community members, and diverse perspectives, and interweaving those narratives in with our own story as an organization.
It's never, and as you mentioned, it's never done.
Right.
And the day-to-day work continues, even though you may not hit one out of the park every time, right? And that consistency is probably really key. And you mentioned that there were a lot of ups and downs at some period of time, but now you've had some consistency, right? And how key is that?
Oh yeah, it's critical. So that, again, with the idea of resiliency, we have not in Laramie had the boom and bust in terms of taking our eyes off the prize. I really attribute our consistency to having a city council that supports our vision. Like, I'm not getting new direction every 6 months, right? It's like, okay, this is where you're going, keep going, keep going, keep going. And then having a board of directors that understands that like, keep going, we're not gonna just every 6 months review our plan or change up the vision. I don't know what else I was going to say. Sorry.
I think that consistency piece is a big deal. So Kayla, talk to me about some of the other communities that you've seen, in your time, and how they've really kind of learned some lessons or done some, hit some singles or doubles, and they hit a home run.
Yeah, well, I do think that consistency is part of it. Again, even if you are tackling and finish some of those large projects and maybe you've been on the board for a long time, that doesn't mean that the work is done. You just need to take a step back and look at what else is there to do, right? I think beyond that, though, collaboration is a big part of it. And it feels like such an overused word at this point, right? But it really is key to everything, because it goes back to the conversation we were just having about playing chess. Every one of those organizations can do a little bit to have an incremental impact, right? So when we're talking about Main Street, we're talking about chambers, we're talking about economic development, we're talking about groups that are focused on tourism. To have them all involved in the larger picture is critical in order for any change to really happen. Because Main Street is really focused on downtown. Economic development can work on business recruitment, expansion, retention, all of those sorts of things. At the same time, you can also have some of those other folks working in their own realms for the greater good. And I do think that there could be improvement in terms of that collaboration within our local communities. And so just to continue to encourage it, I think, and I really do think that that is what the communities that we've had success in, that's their biggest takeaway as well, is, we worked as a Main Street program, we worked with the city, we worked with some of those stakeholders, we worked with the community at large, the residents, and getting volunteers out and whatnot. Those are the people that make things happen, really. I mean, Main Street is a methodology, but it's also the catalyst for change. Main Streeters are not the ones necessarily always on the ground doing all of the work. They're the ones that get the people involved and bring all of those important stakeholders together to do it all together, to share the burden, to share the load. And I think that really is the number one best practice for communities to take away.
Wow, that was fantastic, and I love that. I love the teamwork aspect. It creates that ownership, and really it makes people feel a lot more pride when the work is done.
Exactly.
Right, and so you said collaboration is an overused word, but it's probably an underused technique.
Yes.
And what I would say is that what you were talking about by getting everybody together, and that's a key component. You couldn't have said better. So I'm really glad that that's one the main tool that Main Street uses is that collaborator and somebody who kind of brings those visions together, because that's really, really key. And I think you mentioned that early on. And I think that's something that we as a state, whether you're looking at your local community, whether you're looking at your county, whether you're looking at the state, whether you're looking at the region that we live in, I think that that's something where if you're not exactly sure what to do, reaching out to another group might make a big difference, and trying to understand their vision and how they match up, not how they differ. And so I'm really glad we talked about that at the end, because that's a key component, and I think it's going to be the theme that we see over and over and over again, is how we work together to make our communities more resilient. And Kayla and Trey, I really appreciate the talk about Main Street on What's the Point, and I think we'll do this again for sure. Next time maybe we'll sit outside and have a cup of coffee. And this was really, really good. So thank you for your time, and thank all of you for watching.
Thank you.
Thank you.